Well, we mention it all the time when we have him on. He's the smartest guy in baseball. Nobody better. How are you? It's been a while.
Hey guys, how you doing? I'm doing well. I can't complain. Yeah.
I gotta think for you, like what? Like finals, school, everything's over, and you can just concentrate on baseball now.
Well, no, this semester, once I found out I was going to do Sunday night radio with ESPN,
Yeah.
I realized, like, wait a minute, it's going to be a lot to teach in the same semester where I'm doing the playoffs and all the pennant race stuff. So I decided that it'd be better if I just taught in the spring, where you start in January. You don't have the conflict. So, but I'm still paying attention to the materials and chiming in when I can. But I'm looking towards the spring semester to kick it in gear.
So what is it like for you now as your career is expanding and you start looking at the different things that you're doing? Like you said, now we're going to be talking about postseason and everything. So what's going on and how great is this for your career?
I mean, it's great. What's so interesting is I realized all those years at ESPN, I hadn't done really any playoffs, or I'm like this year, I'm calling the All-Star game on radio with John Shambi. I haven't done any of that stuff. I mean, I was a studio guy mostly. And when I did Wednesday night baseball, I was focused towards the season. And really, we knew the marquee games were really Sundays. So what I love about it is radio. It's a little more low key. You don't have all the production elements like meetings around like what graphics you're using. It's just like, hey, get your information, figure out what's important to share with the fans. And what's cool is, we've been a lot of isolation the last couple of years. I hadn't seen guys as for a long time. I've been at Cub stuff, but I haven't been able to travel the same way. So it's good to find out, like, oh, Tomas Perez is coaching,
Yeah.
whatever, just old teammates, So that part has been really fun, and I love it. I write a poem before every game, and I read it, and they just say, "Hey, whatever you want to do." I'm really enjoying it.
When we look around baseball, we were just talking about it, and we'll get into about the Yankees and the A's, and because I think it's an interesting dynamic between the team with the best record and the team with the worst record, and kind of where baseball is. And one of the ways to look at this is just to look at the standings. And when you see we're not in July yet, and half the teams are not 500, what does that tell you about the sport?
I mean, that's a good point. And you do see, you wonder where that line is to be have and have nots, right? And the decision for the teams that are below that line, what their decision-making process is going to be. Are they going to say, well, hey, let's just build for the future, and then effectively become farm teams for the teams that are making that push? I know they added another couple of playoff teams, but even that is above the line. And I think it should be. I don't think teams like under 500 should make the postseason when you play 162 games. I mean, that's a lot of evidence right there. But yeah, there's no doubt that things are sorting out after we had the shortened 2020 season, and you wanted to see, with that playoff format where they had all these wild card teams, and you wanted to see how things would reset. And look, resources matter. And although there's teams that like the A's have found ways to win, to just be able to have that extra push to, acquire someone at the deadline, or just have the depth that the Dodgers have where they have like 18 all-stars. I mean, yeah, you're in a better driver's seat. There's no question about that. And it's something that baseball is constantly trying to address. And, maybe the lottery system and draft, so maybe things will help a little bit, but there's still an elephant in the room.
If you are running the A's and you got Frankie Montas, who a lot of people, and Peter Gammons real well, and Peter Gammons is reporting that Brian Cashman wants to come out after Frankie. His last outing, he had a no-hitter into the 8th inning. You're now pitching on this big stage. Yankees are the best team in baseball. Everybody's watching every moment. You go out again as Frankie Montas, have another good inning. How do you handle it? Do you want those phone calls rolling in right now, or do you want to wait till the very end and try and find a GM who is the most desperate, or a couple super desperate GMs who are fighting each other at the very end to get Frankie?
Well, the advantage the A's have in this particular case, and some of it is a shame. We have to acknowledge that. But
Yeah.
the advantage they have is all these teams will be interested. And pitching has been, there was a shortage of it to some degree, even going into postseason. Once you got past Max Scherzer and a couple, it was like, who are the free agents. So they are in control. And that way you can go out and say, hey, what pieces are we looking to add? And then work that way. What team is going to give us the best shot of building where we want to go, whether it's by position or by depth or experience. So that's the advantage, because it's not just the Yankees that are going to come knocking. It's not, and it's not just who's going to pay the biggest price. It's like what prospects, if you're making that move, is gonna bolster your organization going forward. So I think they're still in a good position, and they just have to decide those pieces of what elements there are. And right now, look, the A's are struggling. I mean, they have, last in batting average and run score. They're in such a rebuild mode that a lot of pieces are necessary. But the question is, when you get these young pieces, what happens? Do you just turn them over and rototill them into like some other organization, or can you actually add the pieces to now go to the next level? And it remains to be seen based on this season.
And there is, I'm finding a debate on how, when you get those pieces, how to handle it, because I look at other sports, but then old school baseball, people want to say, oh, you can't compare baseball. And I go, wait a minute, why not? Old school people want, if I draft Doug Glanville, or if I trade for Doug Glanville, I want to stick you in the minors for X amount of at-bats, X amount of innings pitched. And I'm going, wait a minute. I can look around at the Atlanta Braves. They got a bunch of guys who are 22, 23. I mean, how long do I really want to see guys in the minor leagues in modern day baseball when I'm watching these other teams start to bring guys up 25 or younger? Let's go. Do you still subscribe to, I got to keep you in the minor leagues for 1,500 at-bats, or, hey, man, I got to see this guy play, because we know we don't want to pay guys in their 30s.
I'll tell you make an excellent point, and I wanted to sort of repeat that message. What you're looking at now is you have these young guys that are productive, and like right away they're coming up and they're able to produce. And you think, let's go back to the Chicago Cubs 2016 team. You have Chris Bryant, you had guys that kind of produced beyond their years, and so when you have guys like that, what you're able to do is when you acquire the pieces, you already have the productivity. It's not like, oh, let me get like a middle of the order guy that's going to do now, because you already have young guys that are doing that. And that's the best of all worlds, because you have a longer horizon of productivity. Rizzo, all these cats that they were part of. And so the expectation is skewed younger now, that when you have Acuna Juniors and Tatis and all these cats that are like producing right away, they're stars, then it doesn't give you as long a horizon of patience to be like, wait a minute, why aren't these guys like, yeah, fine, they're young. They are young, 22. I mean, I got drafted at 20 going to 21. So I understand that from one level, but these guys are producing. And so you have to try to find that combination, ideally, that you have a young guy who's beyond his years in productivity and maturity. And then you're able to have a lot more freedom when you add the other pieces of experience. So yes, I think you can challenge the A's or challenge the organization, say, wait a minute, like, how are we doing this? Because being young is not enough of an answer anymore. And so in terms of what I subscribe to, I have a sensibility around learning all the facets of the game, right? Okay, that's great. You can hit, whatever, but can you run the bases? Can you slide? Do you know how to do, that's not as necessary today, because there's so much focus on the specialization of what's important. Do you get on base? Do you hit for some power? Are you a guy who throws 100 miles an hour? Yeah, you're in the zone, maybe, whatever, but that's not. So I think there is a missing piece and a loss to development when you just focus on one element to say this is what makes you ready. But that is the game today, and if you need a guy throwing 100, you get the next guy, right? And then you bring him in, whether he can hit the corner or if the guy's throwing 100 and with movement, you don't have to hit a whole lot of corners. Okay, that's what we're looking at today.
Yeah, I look at the game and from development, and I like to bring golf into it, because golf and baseball are very similar now with the way everybody's using TrackMan and Hawkeye and the way baseball uses StatCast. I like to call them, whether in golf you're a range warrior, or in baseball you're a batting cage or a bullpen warrior, where people are going to tell you all these different numbers about vertical, horizontal, spin rates, how hard you throw it, launch, and all this kind of stuff. But then once you have all these numbers, like on the range in golf, you can hit the ball a bazillion yards, but you got to go out and play golf. What happens when you short side yourself or you don't, you got to go out and actually play the game to score. Baseball's the same way. You can sit in the bullpen, throw 100, and you can have a little moment. If you can't throw strikes, or if you're somebody who goes up to the plate, you can't run the bases, you can't play defense. So we have learned about all these great numbers where we can track what human beings and what kind of human you are. But do you know how to actually play the game when it's game time? That's something we need to get better at.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt. And all these sports, it's not just baseball or just society, the algorithms, the data is such a driver. Now, I appreciate that, especially as like a center fielder where I wanted value to be seen in my defense. And there wasn't a whole lot of metrics saying, hey, this is why you're an asset. So I applaud the idea of trying to find value. And the A's, look, they were a big part of this because they started to see value in players that wasn't necessarily on the surface, in the traditional ways. So there's a definite positive there. But what it does, if you skew it so far one direction, you do lose a lot of the human element. Like a perfect example is this. Like I can say, all right, I'm on second base and I could steal third right now. So now the numbers will tell you, well, if I get caught, let's say it's 1 out or something, I get caught, the probability, my run probability, my chance of scoring a run, my run the expectations, I'm saying this wrong, but terms wise, but the chances of me, right. So the chances of me scoring a run, if I get caught, let's say that goes down by, 80%. But then if I make it, it only goes up by 40%, right? So what you start to look at is saying, well, if I steal this base, that what I've risked and what I lose by getting caught is much greater than what I gain by making it. And when you start to look at every equation like that, it's pretty easy to see why you just eliminate the stolen base altogether, right? So why take the risk? And the thing about, to me, the joy of the game or any sport or anything is actually the low percentage play. It's the excitement of the impossible happening. And if you don't put a position, like a pitcher in a position to say, well, what would happen if I go into the seventh here? Individually, you do lose that, and you lose the warriors of the game, like Fernando Valenzuela versus Tom Seaver. Like, yeah, let's just see who can go 12 innings, and that's kind of marketable. I used to love looking in the box for Steve Carlton versus Fernando, or Mario Soto versus Ron Guidry or whatever. So there's trade-offs, and I think that when you talk about the humanity, the human element, you don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that soul where everything's just numbers and stuff. Because I remember talking to Barry Bonds at the cage one day, and he said, and this is post-career, and he's like, okay, fine. You shift and put everybody all over the place. I get it. You might be able to keep me from hitting 400, but you're not going to keep me from hitting 300 with slugging percentage. Right? So now that's Barry Bonds. But the reality is, like, yeah, if a person knows how can play to that, he just hits it over the shift, right? And of course, your whole game changes around it. But you lose in the athleticism, hit and run, stealing bases, seeing guys just putting balls in play. All that can get lost in the algorithms. And I think that's where you have to try to do a reset.
I think of Al Davis. Was it a high percentage play to throw the ball deep? No, but Al Davis always wanted to throw deep because it kept everybody honest all the time. And like you said, not high percentage, but sometimes you got to do stuff. I mean, I've been watching it, and I've been saying it because I got to do TV hits before every game. And I go, I'm tired of watching us have a starting pitcher come out in the 5th or the 6th inning without 100 pitches thrown to go to a bullpen that the number says the bullpens aren't very good. We keep running this exact same playbook over and over and over again. I'm like, what is there? And Dave Stewart, who does our television for pre and post, I'll say to Stu, Stu, you never had a problem going 120 or 130. Why can't we just see if these guys can do it?
Well, I mean, look, we had Joe Madden on our podcast last couple of years, and he described it pretty well. He said, all right, think of the auto industry. He's like, everybody is making the same car because we have the same information, right? We're using it and we're trying to parse it. And yeah, some teams have more money, but you're kind of working off of this shared data set. And, and just so go back in the 80s or something, Cardinals on turf, and they're running, and the Harvey Wallbangers and the Brewers, and these teams were so different, and they took on different personalities. But when you have all the data that's shared, then you're just trying to like out data someone, right? You're trying to, and you lose something in that because there's more to it. And look, like I said, I appreciate the science and the digging for information. You have the information. It's just like we have all these cameras. You can't just make a call that everybody can see is wrong and just act like nothing happened. So you have to use the technology. But I think that you always have to push back and ask those questions so that you still maintain like, well, what kind of game do we want? Because yeah, like you said, Dave Stewart, guys going into the ninth inning, is that exciting? That could be exciting for the game. And when you always, like I did the game the other day, it was Dodgers in Atlanta. Freddie Freeman came back. So I was calling the game. Tony Gonsolin's on the mound. This dude is 9-0 with like a 1-5. Now, granted, he didn't go always deep in the game. So sixth inning gets around, I think, and he gets 2 outs. He gives up a hit, he's out immediately. And we talked to Dave Roberts before the game, and he's like, that's probably what's going to happen. So there's no like, hey, let me see what Tony Gonsolin's going to do. And with first and third, a little bit tired, but, see what we can get out of it, right? Because that builds something in Tony Gonsolin that if you get in this situation later, you're like, oh, I've been here before. But it's not. And so the counter, I guess, is like, well, it's not about the individual's development, right? It's not about him. It's about like, who's in the best position to get this out in this particular moment. And that's very different. But when you slice things into so many individual decision-making trees, it's very clear why you don't see the forest as well. And that's what we're battling a lot in baseball.
Interesting that you were in Atlanta. I want to get your take on the whole Freddie Freeman, how it went down. Like, we understand he comes back. He's an all-time Braves great, gets his ring, a lot of hugs. There's some tears. But it kept going for days. Now, obviously, I'm in my own world doing A's games, so I've only got to see a little bit of Sunday Night Baseball and everything. It was Clayton Kershaw that had, I don't know if you're going to say cryptic, but it was a comment basically saying, hey, I get it. It sucked to leave and everything, but you're one of us, right? Like, the importance is us. You're a Dodger now. What did you take away from that series? Freeman's reactions, how some Dodger players took it. Just what was your overall take after the series?
I mean, I'll tell you, man, wow. I mean, it was wow. Like, I'm still kind of like processing being there, and also just like reading today about Freddie Freeman and his agent and all these things. Like,
yeah,
wow. And so I think, well, let's take you to the moment. Like, yeah, it was really powerful. And we asked Dave Roberts in advance about all this stuff just to see. And so we're just like, well, what is it about? Okay, moving on. Like me coming up, they used to say, cut the cord. That's your, we used to kind of get on each other about like the teary-eyed past. But it is healthy, as Dave Roberts underscored. It's healthy. Like this. You were there for 12 years. It didn't play out like you thought. Clearly, it's even more than we understand in some ways. But he ended up in LA, and obviously a great team. But yeah, that's part of life, and you try to figure out how do you reconcile it. It could be painful for a long time, and he's clearly still devastated. But as Dave Roberts also said, Freddie Freeman's still an assassin in the batter's box. And by the way, he got the game-leading hit late in the game against his old team that he might be teary-eyed about. But he got in the box and he couldn't even compose himself. He was taking these deep breaths. He backed out. And Spencer Strider, the pitcher for the Braves, like stepped off the mound. I mean, it was deep. And this was just like the first at bat of the third game of the series. So I think there's a lot to do with it's hard to retain players for a lifetime. And if anybody was going to do it, we thought it was Freddie Freeman. Like we just felt, whether Aaron Judge or whatever, but Freddie Freeman was that guy because he's beloved across the sport, but also in Atlanta. He kind of belongs to all of us. So it doesn't matter where he plays because he just has that baseball about him, So that, it's a miss. And I get Alex Anthopoulos. He gets a guy who's younger, who's, good player, very good in Olsen. And he's like, hey, I got this guy for longer. And I'm, I got free agent years and I get the math of it. And Anthopoulos was choked up about it in making that move. But it just seemed like it's clear it did not go as Freddie Freeman expected. And that is clearly still devastating. And it's a big loss for everyone. But, baseball will continue to move on. But as for teammates, you got to be careful. You got to be careful being like, hey, why are you still like, he's still playing all-star baseball. Okay. He's still doing what he has to do. And it's very human, especially given the pandemic the last couple of years, to look and be like, hey, this is what I went through all these things with my family and these guys. it's still part of me, and it's made me who I am as a player, which I can deliver to the LA Dodgers. The Dodgers are going to be a good team, no doubt. So, but yeah, there's a lot of pain there, man. A lot of pain still.
Yeah, very obvious too. You go through all that emotion, and then after the series, you dump your agent. So clearly, he wanted to stay in Atlanta. Negotiations went sideways. At some point, we'll get the whole story. But that weekend, actions speak louder than words, as they like to say. And that was a very telling weekend. Before we let you go, you got to buy stock in one team. I said yesterday, I can look at the Yankee numbers. I know one thing. The Yankees hit home runs. They score runs by hitting home runs. That's why, and you can give me all the different things that they have going now with this team. But in the end, when they get into postseason baseball, they're so reliant on home runs. I'm not buying it. You may be buying it. If you could buy stock in one team, I think the Astros, what they just showed you versus the Yankees at Yankee Stadium. But if you could buy stock, National League, American League, we're almost in July, so we got a long way to go. But if you could buy stock in one team right now, who would that be?
Whew, that is a tough one. It might be the Dodgers. It might be the Dodgers. I mean, they have first of all, every time you're facing someone, they're an MVP or runner up to an MVP or an all-star. I mean, they have 18 all-stars on it. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's also like the way they play, I've seen them play like so-so baseball, they play the Cubs but they find different ways to beat you. They can beat you late, beat you with speed, they beat you with power, they Freddie Freeman you, whatever that, he should have his own verb in there. And they're also getting pitching from guys that are, maybe what you would say is unexpected. And that's something to be said, like that that they have confidence in being able to throw anybody out there in their roster and win. And Robert said, he's like, our biggest enemy is us mismanaging this roster. He had no weakness, he could say. He's like, well, if I run guys into the ground, I get them hurt. Yeah, that's going to hurt us. He didn't say I'm worried about the Astros or whoever. So, but yeah, it's people got to be healthy. That's what it comes down to. And I saw the Yankees, and they're really good. Their pitching and their bullpen, there's so many weapons, they're gonna have to figure out how to use them. And Judge is just playing out of his mind, and that's. But will Judge stay healthy? Will Stanton stay healthy? I don't know. All of a sudden, when those guys aren't there, it's a different team. So, and that's happened enough to say that that's probably the rule, more the exception. So, and then the Mets, I look at the Mets and I see a team that's, actually, really good. Like they do a lot of different things. And I watched this lineup, and they're going the other way. They're beating the shift. You could see they have a collective mentality around hitting to take what's given to them, and they're executing. So it's fun. I'll throw the Dodgers out there. But I want to see who makes what moves at the trade deadline, and then who's just fortunate enough to stay healthy.
Well, I got to tell you, it's always an honor to have you on the program. You always make our show that much smarter. Continued success with everything. The podcast with Jason Stark, the Hall of Famer. You mean a lot to our game. You're fantastic, and thank you so much. And let's do this again soon.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Always love being on, man. So just remember, love baseball, man. And it's it's for all of us. And I hope I use it for my show to bring people together. And so we're all in this family, and we obviously clearly all love the game. So great to be on.
Great stuff. Be well.
All right, man. Take care.